Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, why is it important that we keep ourselves informed as to what's going on with the economy, with the financial system? All right, because I know this is a prepping channel, but it's this prepping. I believe that information that's relevant to what can cause a decline in our standard of living is prepping, because this way we can think ahead and position ourselves in a way where we can thrive instead of just merely survive during a long-term crisis. For example, the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, those people that were not very well informed and followed the unconstitutional law that was put in the books by FDR to turn in their gold. Those people turned in their gold and effectively saw their standard of living decrease by about 65 to 70% overnight once gold was revalued from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. Now, many think that everyone turned in their gold, and that's not true. Only about 1/3 of Americans turned in their gold during that time. And although owning gold was made illegal by passing an unlawful law, because remember, ladies and gentlemen, legal and lawful are two different things. Something can be made legal or illegal by edict, just like that law was made back in 1933 by FDR. So only because it's made legal by a governing force doesn't mean that it's lawful. And we're seeing that right now in front of our eyes. So like I said, only about 1/3 of them turned in their gold. Well, the other 2/3, ladies and gentlemen, I've read stories about the Great Depression that those people that kept their gold were able to eat. Well, how is that, AP? How were they able to eat if it was illegal for people to transact and or own gold? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the black market is probably the freest market that there is. And I believe that the reason they put black in front of the word market was to make it sound bad. Right? Like the black market. It sounds bad, right? Isn't the other one the black web or something like that? It just sounds bad, right? So people are conditioned to think that only because the black market has the word black in front of it that it's supposed to be bad. When in reality, it's good. Because what the black market does is it allows people to interact one-on-one without the forces of government telling them how much of their money they have to give the government on things that they have already paid taxes on. So for example, let's say I buy a bicycle at Walmart, all right, or anywhere, and I pay $100 for that bicycle. Well, I've already paid taxes on the $100 that I used to buy that bicycle. And depending on what state you live in, you probably have to pay taxes again just to buy that bicycle, right? And then a year or two goes by and you realize that that bicycle is just collecting dust in your shed. And you're like, let me go ahead and put this on Craigslist. And you put it on Craigslist. And then you sell it. Well, that's considered a black market economy. Why? Because the government does not track, and they cannot track your sale of that bicycle to someone else. Therefore, they cannot tax it. So that's why I feel that we have to keep ourselves abreast of what's going on in the economy, because what goes on in the economy will affect almost all of us. And the reason I say almost is because there is a small percentage of people out there that live like the Amish, let's say, right? Where the Amish, they pretty much are disconnected from what regular society is going through. They for the most part don't even know who the president is, or who the politicians are, or who the movie stars or superstars or sports stars are. They just live their lives, and they live within a community that is very self-reliant within itself. But that's not most of us. If you have a bank account, if you have an ATM card, if you have a credit card, if you have a house note or a car note or any kind of loan whatsoever, what happens in the financial markets will affect us even though we think it may not, because it's all interconnected. And with this thing that's going on with Evergrande in China, which is a really large company that has its hands in a lot of different things, with their ongoing collapse, it will definitely affect the entire world. And it will definitely affect us here in the United States. One of the reasons is because I do believe that the $300+ billion worth of debt that Evergrande has, I believe it's like 80% of it is denominated in US dollars. So that will have very large implications to the United States if they cannot make their loan payments, or at the very least their interest payments. Now here Jim Rickards says that there will be no recovery until 2045. And I've stated several times after being asked that I believe that one of the black swan events that will occur or could occur to get us into this next major crisis that they need us to get into will be a financial crash. What type, I don't know. And I've also been asked, when do you think that the SHTF is going to happen? And I believe that it's happening right now. It's just happening in slow motion. And the third thing that I've been asked several times, how long do you think it'll last? And to that I've answered several times, stack it to the rafters. Because I believe that it'll take at least one generation before we can get back to where we were before, as far as our standard of living goes. And now I come across this article by Jim Rickards, no recovery until 2045. And ladies and gentlemen, 25 years is about one generation. And I would have to say that so far, I agree with Jim Rickards. We are in a controlled demolition when it comes to our financial system and our economy as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at this article, because Jim Rickards, very smart man. I can't say I agree with everything that he's ever said about the economy or about the system, but this guy's been around the block and he knows what he's talking about. Here he says, the economy is now at a perilous point of departure. There was no V-shaped recovery, and with that I have to agree, and one should not be expected. There was a severe contraction in March and April of 2020, followed by a recovery in July to September of 2020. However, the recovery only made up part of the lost ground, not all of it. We had a partial V or a truncated V. The economy recovered somewhat, but growth is not back to the prior trend. Bearing in mind that the prior trend of 2009 to 2019 was itself below the long-term trend. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that this recovery that we've had since 2008, it hasn't really been a recovery, because the entire time it was below the trend. So we haven't been in a recovery. Our financial system has been on life support for the last 12 to 13 years since what is called the Great Recession. For the past 18 months, the economic damage of the health crisis has been papered over with federal handouts of various kinds. Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you what is the Federal Reserve going to do during this next economic/financial downturn? What tools do they have in their tool bag, as they always like to say? What will they do? Lower interest rates? Last I checked, interest rates were at the lowest that they've been in history pretty much. So they can't really lower interest rates anymore. I think right now the federal funds rate is at like 0.25%, a quarter of a percent or less. So what are they going to lower it to? They can't lower it to negative interest rates. They can't do that because we still have cash in the system, physical cash. Until they get rid of physical cash and have us go cashless, then they can start doing negative interest rates, because then they own 100% of our labor. You see, right now they own our labor, right? Our labor is what backs up the Federal Reserve note. Everyone says it's oil, it's oil. No, it's not. It is the labor of the U.S. citizen, of the taxpayer, that backs up the U.S. dollar. Because without that labor, there will be no taxes. And without taxes, the federal government could not collect any wealth from its citizens or labor. I like to call it labor because that's really what they're stealing from us, is our labor. Without taxes, the federal government cannot collect our labor. And without that, they cannot pay interest on our national debt. So in my humble opinion, I believe that it is our labor. That is why a lot of people call us cattle. We are cattle to these people because we are here to produce a product for them. We had a $2 trillion bailout under the last president in June of 2020, followed by another $900 billion bailout during his final days as president in December of 2020. This administration followed with another $2 trillion bailout in February of 2021 and is still pushing for another $1 trillion infrastructure bill and an additional $3.5 trillion welfare bill, which is now pending before Congress. So check this out. We had $2 trillion, $1 trillion. Before that, we had $2 trillion, $900 billion. They're asking for another $3.5 trillion. And the people, ladies and gentlemen, received $1,200, $600, and $1,400. So a total of $3,200. So for $3,200 in our checking account, of which a lot of people didn't even get. So for $3,200, ladies and gentlemen, let me see if I can do the math really quick. We're looking at 45, 65, 85, $9.7 trillion or $9.4 trillion. $9.4 trillion in government spending, and all it took was for the government to give people $3,200 or so. Isn't that something? We had Paycheck Protection Program loans, $50 billion airline bailouts, and similar large-scale bailouts for cruise ships, resorts, casinos, and other affected industries. And I want to point out that these affected industries were affected by the regulations and mandates and actions that government put out. So the government is what affected the profitability of these industries by the regulations and mandates that it put out. And then it came out and gave all of these bailouts with money that it is taking from our future, from our children's future, their children, and so forth. And not only that, we are now starting to see the inflation. We are now starting to pay back these funds that were printed out of nowhere in the form of inflation of prices of everything that we need. The immediate problem is that the economy is clearly slowing down right now. Just as many of these programs expire and before new programs come online. States have the ability to make up the difference from their own resources, but most don't have the money. New York is clearly a state that has a huge budget deficit on its own, and it's not allowed by law to engage in more deficit spending to undertake new programs. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why they are pushing for these higher taxes. You see, the pennies that we received in stimulus is now coming back to bite us in the butt. It's almost like taking out a credit card. That stimulus that we received over the last year and a half or so, that $3,200 worth, it's almost like we personally took out a credit card with 30% interest. And we will pay interest on that $3,200 that we received. We will pay interest for decades in the form of price inflation, in the form of your standard of living going down, because you're not making any more money unless you're the Fed share and Fed presidents who make millions off of trading stock through the back door. Sometimes it's called insider trading, but I'm not going to get into that, right? Other states may have the funds but are choosing not to spend the money because they believe that unemployment recipients should be motivated to get a job. Apart from the merits of these debates, there is no doubt that the federal supplement to income is expiring at the same time that the economy is slowing down for other reasons. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this may be pretty dry to some, but to those that stick through this, I'll leave the link to this article so that you can revisit it if you just want to read it yourself. Stick through this, become better prepared, because even if you don't have money in the bank, this will still affect you. Even if you are out of the system, this will still affect you. Take a look at the supply disturbances that we have had. That has affected everyone. Well, let me say almost everyone, because if you have enough money, you can pretty much get whatever you want. You just have to pay more money for it, right? But it has affected a whole bunch of people. Now, 2 years before this supply disruption was going on, would I have said here and said, yes, we're going to have supply disruptions and this and this and that, most people would have been like, yeah, that's not going to affect me, until it does. And that's why going through these things, that is why educating ourselves in what's going on in these subject matters that we really don't find interesting is very important. Because this is how they get us, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not a financial advisor, but one thing that I'm going to do is I am going to start stocking up on some paper money. And let me tell you why. Instead of going out and purchasing what you all know I really like to use as a wealth preservation vehicle, some precious metals, I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that when this next crisis envelops or unfolds, I believe that gold and silver are going to crash. And why is that? Let's take, for example, Evergrande, that deal that's going on in China right now with that big company. Right now, they are searching for dollars. Why? Because most of their loans are denominated in dollars. And if you look around the world, if you look around that 300 trillion plus debt that's floating around the world, most of that is denominated in dollars. Now, when these loans come due, people are going to need dollars to pay them back. So there is going to be a great demand of dollars. Just for example, take a look at this. Let me show you the chart of the dollar here. And here's the chart of the dollar. This is right now current. It's approximately 5:45 a.m. All right, Monday morning. And as you can see here, for the last few days, the dollar has gone up because there is a need for dollars right now. Why? Because most debt is denominated in dollars. Does that mean that the dollar is more valuable? Not really. All right. Has the price of food gone down? When you take a look at the dollar, especially for where you live, for the country you live in, if you take a look at our dollar here in the U.S., even though it's going up in value when compared to other currencies, is it really going up in value for you to purchase those things that you need to live? The new depression continues. We are in a new depression now. Growth declined in 2008. The 2009 to 19 recovery averaged annual growth of about 2.2%, well below the long-term trend of 3.5%. That's almost 100% below the average trend. Annualized growth for the first half of 2021 is 6.4%. When you take into consideration that inflation during this period has averaged about 5.4, 5.5%, that means that realistically, in real terms, we only grew by about 1%. Whereas in the past, where we were growing from 3.5 to 4.5% and inflation was 2% or less, that means that real growth was 2% or more. So we're actually growing in real terms at about 50% of what we were growing before, even during the downturn of 2009 to 2019 or so. This is characteristic of a new Great Depression that can last for many years. Once the inflation narrative fades and the disinflation narrative comes to the fore, we can expect a stock market correction as asset prices adjust to the return of an era of slow growth. And this is why I say that I feel that gold and silver and Bitcoin and pretty much anything that's denominated in dollars is going to drop in nominal price, because we will go into a disinflationary spiral that the Federal Reserve cannot control. And why is that? Because they cannot print enough money to cover all of the debt in the world. And he finishes off here by saying there will be no recovery until 2045. One study from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco in collaboration with outside academics showed that of the 19 highest fatality health crises since the Black Death in the mid-1300s, the average time needed to return to normal levels of interest rates, growth, and employment is more than 30 years. Well, ladies and gentlemen, stock it to the rafters. Stock it to the rafters. I'm not a financial advisor, but I'm going to go ahead and start putting away a little bit of, dry powder, as I like to call it, meaning paper cash, and maybe take advantage of some sales when we do go into a deflationary spiral. In my opinion, we will have a deflationary spiral, and the Federal Reserve will only be able to combat that by doing one thing, and that is buying, 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 and allowing the banks to print, 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 putting more and more liquidity out into the economy and sending us into a hyperinflationary spiral. So usually when these depressions start, we usually go deflationary and then we go inflationary. And that is what I believe will take us down before anything else. Now, anything can happen. We can have a cyber attack, as has been being talked about for a while now. And that would be very convenient for the powers that be. Because I can imagine that if we do have a cyber attack, that after the banks open back up, we will be in a new monetary system. They will take that blackout period, let's say, to convene with one another's, with all of the powers around the world, and create a new monetary system. And at least for us here in the United States, I foresee that once we enter a new monetary system, everything will be valued at about half, or at least nominally valued at about half of what it was before, including your labor, ladies and gentlemen. So they will be able to steal your labor right under your noses. And most people will be thanking them. Most people will say, thank you so much. Thank you so much for fixing this, not knowing that it is their labor, i.e. their freedom, that is being stolen from them. Having said that, thank you very much. If you hung in all the way, that is awesome. All right. Thank you very much for hanging in there. I hope you have a good week this week. Happy Monday to all of you. Be safe. Remember to be good to each other. When good people do good things happen. Remember to reach one, teach one, and repeat. If we all did this, the world would be a better place, and you know that it will be a better place. Many blessings to all of you and your families. I'm Alaska Prepper, and I'm out.